everybody, this is Politics by Jake. This is the official post-Labor Day show. I hope you all had a good long weekend. I know that it stretches out for some of you to 3 or 4 or 5 days, and that's all right. And before we move on with the other things, and there's, of course, always lots of other things to talk about, I wanted to, do what I guess I would call Labor Day reflections. Post-Labor Day reflections, okay? So Labor Day is past, and we are now heading into a different season. Some people say that this is the beginning of fall. Obviously, autumn, fall does not begin until September 21st or thereabouts. But some people calculate it in that particular way. We're heading into this season, I'm afraid, that is going to be fraught for several reasons. And really, there is every reason to believe that forces are working to compromise what you have repeatedly heard me refer to on this show as the sacred token, the holy icon of democracy, the sacred franchise, and by that I mean the vote. I have recently talked, and I have used the example of France, but this is just one example. It's kind of an outrageous example, but it's one example where the workers, they had no vote at all. All the other classes had a vote. The clergy, they were on top. They had the most power in their vote. The rich, they were just below that. The bourgeoisie, those who had money, they were down below that. There was a tier of voting, all for them. But the workers and the peasants, who were called the fourth estate, they had no vote whatsoever. And it's not just the old French system. I'm using that one as an example, and how forces that array themselves against labor have always been the old enemies of labor, and how they are still there. They never go away. They are generational. They are indefatigable, which means they never get tired. They're this, frankly, malevolent force, and they're arrayed against you, my listeners. Even now, they have tricked you by ways and means in order to keep you down. And what you may say, Jake, what are they keeping us down from? And I would say, why, merely living. And they enlist whatever they can think of: morality, custom, culture, society, religion, all to make their point, which is that, among other things, that you should work. You have to work. One of the tricks they use is to tell you that work is honorable. And that, by derogation, I suppose, if you do not work, you are dishonorable. And I have said on this show, fine, let's say that. Let's say, if only for the sake of the argument, in other words, if there was no other reason, let's pretend that there is no other reason. Let's pretend that, again, purely for the sake of the argument, just so I'm understood here, that there is no other supportable feature for the idea that all must work, and that it is honorable. Why is not all pay the same? Why is the pay that all persons receive for honorable work going by extension, assuming for the sake of argument that some would say, oh, well, that's ridiculous, all pay cannot be the same, blah, 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 blah. Why, then, is the pay that all persons receive for honorable work not sufficient to provide housing, to provide nutritious food, to provide decent clothing, to provide a decent education? Well, whenever I say this, of course, it stops them. They don't know how to deal with that. It's too inconvenient a thing to consider because it doesn't, again, purely for the sake of the argument, it doesn't begrudge the rich their riches, even though I think and have said that such grotesque concentrations of wealth as those who accumulate billions and tens of billions and even hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth is probably de facto and de jure evidence of some kind of mental trauma, some kind of underlying mental illness, some kind of emotional sickness or condition, very much like Donald Trump, but obviously not him only. I love the movie Chinatown by Roman Polanski. I think it's a classic movie. Some great acting in it. Jack Nicholson is in it. Faye Dunaway is in it. John Huston is in it. And I recommend it to you. It's absolutely, positively a classic movie, which of any movie, if you had a choice to see, this would be one of the ones you would want to see. And in it, there's a scene between the private detective, who is played by Jack Nicholson, and the rich man, played by John Huston, who is not only an actor, but he's a great director. And there's this oh so prominent in my mind scene between J.J. Gittes, who is called Jake. And this to me, and that's Jack Nicholson's character, that's the private detective. And this to me is a wonderful, compelling scene in what is overall just a great movie, where Jake is questioning the John Huston character, whose name is Noah Cross. He's a rich man. And he's questioning him about his wealth and riches. And he says to Cross, says several things, but he says, why are you doing it? I mean, how much better can you eat? What could you buy that you can't already afford? Because Gittes doesn't understand, and it's not just that he doesn't understand. He can't even fathom it. And although more could be said, this is the crux of the entire point. You can't really live better. You can't eat better. Not really. You can't eat more. The point of food, at its most fundamental, is to keep you from starving. The point of the house is to keep you from the elements. Why deny these things to others if in fact you attain them for yourself? Or why do you prescribe them so that they do not reach a standard of decency and, more important, sufficiency? Indeed, what more can you eat? How much better can you live? What more can you buy than what you can already afford? And that, in a nutshell, is very much the idea of the New Deal. And the New Deal made the middle class powerful. And that's the problem. The New Deal, now approaching 100 years old, proposed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a rich man himself, hated, by the way, for what he did, because he was considered a traitor to his own class, which is the rich. And that should tell you something about the sensibilities of class. We don't like to talk about class here in America. We want everybody to be equal. But what you have to realize, or as I say, give space in your mind simply to consider that it might be true, is that class consciousness is very much prominent in the minds of some. So the New Deal proposes all of these things, and it's simple, really. It just proposes a baseline equity, the right to a job, useful, productive work, fair wages, I would say a living wage, the right to earn enough income adequate for food, for clothing, for recreation, a decent living, the right of farmers to sell their products at a return that allows a decent living, the right of businessmen to operate free of monopolies and unfair competition, the right to a home, decent shelter for every family, the right to medical care, health, and the chance to achieve it, the right to security, protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, and the right to education, a good education for every child. And it was reduced in its plainest but perhaps most profound meaning to a statement that is actually found in the Atlantic Charter, 1941, between Churchill and FDR. A necessitous man is not a free man. The idea being, if you're crushed by poverty, if you can't secure food, housing, health, or work, your political liberties, they are paper thin. Hunger, eviction, untreated illness, they don't leave much room for exercising free speech or casting a ballot with independence. As I say, this was even embodied in the Atlantic Charter, which was Roosevelt and Churchill's vision of the post-war world, which is interesting because it dates to 1941, when the issue arguably was quite in doubt. But there are several planks, but one of them, and I mean, maybe I could go through this in another show, it's not really necessary, but one of the crucial planks is freedom from want and freedom from fear. But what do we see around us? Awful scenes, awful spectacles of want and need and fear. That's why the Second Bill of Rights wasn't about expanding government for its own sake. It was about grounding liberty in material security, arguing that without that floor, freedom becomes a luxury only the comfortable can afford. And let me put it plainly. The Trumpist fascist cabal does not only dream of canceling the 2028 elections, they're already preparing to strangle 2026. And That's not speculation. That's trajectory. You can see the outlines of it already. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. The Second Bill of Rights was revolutionary. It proposed that want and fear are not just conditions, they're weapons. Freedom without bread or the other things, by very definition, that is no freedom at all. And when they come for your vote, quite possibly as soon as 2026, which is something we're going to talk about, like I said on this show, I've already talked about in other shows. Remember, they are coming for your life. Don't forget who strips it away and who stands to restore it. And I'm here to remind you who it is who wields them. I'm here to help you know who it is who resists them. Because if you give them a chance, even half a chance, or the tiniest sliver or opening or weakness in the chain, they'll strip you of bread before they strip you of the ballot, and then they'll strip you of both. And when those are gone, it will be blood to get them back, if in fact they can be gotten back at all. Remember where they come from and who proposes to fix them. Draw the distinction. Don't be fooled. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. This is Jake, here to tell you the world is on fire, only you're not being told who actually lit the match. Politics by Jake, Mondays and Fridays at 7 a.m. on KCAA. Okay, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And continuing with my post-Labor Day reflections, let's talk some more. Let's talk about the so-called American dream. This is one that really kills me. You know, you work hard, you play by the rules, buy a home, build a future. It sounds fine until you do the math. The minimum wage, that's not a floor. It's a trapdoor. It doesn't sustain life. It sustains return trips to the same dead-end job. Employers call it fair pay, but fair to whom? To shareholders, maybe, not to the worker trying to save for a home on $12 an hour. And then there's the gig economy. They pitch it as freedom. Be your own boss. Pick your own hours. And in reality, it's precariousness packaged as innovation. No benefits, no security, no stability. Try qualifying for a mortgage when your income evaporates every time the algorithm shifts. And this is why I say, living without a living wage, or I should say working, I guess, without a living wage, it's like being on the Titanic. You can sprint to higher decks, you can rearrange all the deck chairs, you can hustle, you can grind, you can side gig, you can DoorDash yourself into exhaustion, but the iceberg isn't moving. Wages that don't cover housing, food, healthcare, and education guarantee one thing. Eventually, the water's going to catch up. And here's the cruel trick. We're told that work itself is a moral test. If you do it, you're honorable. If you don't, you're defective. But what if the so-called honor is just a leash? What if the very system preaching work as a virtue has no intention of paying enough for survival, let alone dignity? That's not a dream. That's a con. And it's time to call it by its name. A society that demands work but denies a living wage, it's not rewarding virtue. It's enforcing a servitude. And you know, the debate isn't even really about the minimum wage. That's the easy target. What we're talking about is the whole spectrum of underpayment. Wages that, even if they're above the legal minimum, still guarantee stress, struggle, and eventual collapse. Employers tell themselves a story in order to sleep at night, and this is the story. They say the market sets the price of labor. They say a job is a privilege, and if you don't like the pay, you can leave. Perhaps you've heard that before. It's called right to work. Hey, we have the right to work. Yeah. And they say it's honorable to work. That's another thing. No matter the wage. And if you're struggling, well, the problem is you, not them. That's the morality play. Work is cast as both a necessity and a virtue. Don't work? You're lazy, defective, immoral. Work for starvation wages? You're noble. Until you crack, until you collapse, until you simply can't keep going. And then the system just shrugs, replaces you with another desperate soul. Plenty like you to be found. It's a kind of economic catechism drilled into us since childhood. Hard work equals success. But when wages don't rise with prices, when housing and education and health care outpace earnings year after year, that catechism just becomes a con. People internalize the failure. They feel guilt. They feel shame. When in truth, they're being played. I mean, look around you. Fast food, that's a perfect example. Multi-billion-dollar chains, global empires, branded grease and sugar, paying wages 9, 10, maybe $12 an hour. You try living on that. Rent swallows at least half of that. At least half of that. If you're lucky, it's only half of that. Food, it's another third. Utilities, transportation, and maybe you scrape together enough for the kids' shoes. Forget saving for a home. Forget security. Forget dignity. And this is why I talk about slavery. That's why you hear me call them economic slaves. Not in the sense of shackles, not in the sense of chains, not in the sense that they are not human beings, but that they equate to a carriage or a car or a block of wood or some other thing, but in the sense of bondage to survival itself. You work, and the work is honorable, that's the story, but the wage, it's engineered to keep you in a permanent crouch, head just above water, never breathing free. But that, oh well, that's just a different issue. Work is honorable. But we can pay you a crap wage that you can't live on. And here's the rub. It doesn't matter how many side hustles you stack, how many chairs you rearrange on the deck of that ship. If the baseline wage can't sustain life, the iceberg is waiting for you. The house, the savings, and the dream, they're a mirage. Instead of getting a living wage, what you get is a system that calls servitude of virtue and tells you, you should be grateful. All of this while you're drowning. And the capper on all this, when someone like Joe Biden, perhaps the greatest president of the working man for 70 years, goes to these rich, these entitled, and that's how they think of themselves, by the way, and says, doesn't castigate them or chastise them for their riches like some would, but instead says, you guys got rich on America. That's great. Now, how about paying your fair share? You know what happens? Crickets. Dead silence. Okay, folks, so those are some of my post-Labor Day ruminations and thoughts. And we'll take a break and we'll be back. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake to tell you you're not crazy. The system is rigged. Help us say it louder, won't you? Join us at patreon.com/politics by Jake. And this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And I've been talking on the show, and I probably will do so more, about the fascist corporate state. And I talked about how that, for example, in the French Estates General, the peasants and the workers, they got no vote at all. And yet they were expected to do all the labor. This is basically top-down slavery. And you could call it, what you want. But the case of France, this is basically the way it has been for centuries. And it's only in the 20th century, in the 19th century a little bit, that somehow, also in the 20th century, it began to change. And it's being fought against and tamped down. People talk about work all the time. Religious people are like this. They talk about the sacredness and the holy and the honorable nature of work. And I always say to them, look, if all work is honorable, why is not all pay the same? And they just totally don't get this. But it's the essence of things, isn't it? If the fourth estate is the peasants and the workers in France, for example, using the French example, and they don't get to vote, what is that? If they don't have a say in the government, what is that? What do you call that? And this is my point about these things. And really, the only way to resolve these things, honestly, is to have a picking up and a perpetuation and a continuation of the New Deal, which the fascist right hates, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to establish a corporate state, or I should say a corporatist state, which is in contravention and against everything that the New Deal is trying to accomplish and has accomplished. And you should make no mistake that they hate what's been accomplished, and they are dedicated to destroying it. And of course, they have definitely found their man, Donald Trump, who openly solicited, always has solicited, no shame, the moneyed class, who at his inauguration back in January literally festooned the stand with billionaires. And I said at the time, and I ask you again, do you think this is chance? It's not. It's a signal. It's a clarion call. The rats have come out of hiding, are infesting the government openly, and if you don't think they know what they are about and why, well, all I can say is guess again. And the attacks on democracy, and when I say that, I'm cognizant of the fact that some wags or sly or mean persons who seek to catch you in your words will say this. Will say, we do not have a democracy. You are mistaken. They'll say, we have a republic. To which I say, we do not have a republic. What we have is a hybrid. And that was all wisdom. All forms of government, monarchies, autocracies, oligarchies, oligopsonies, fascism, what have you, they all fail. But a hybrid has a far better chance to succeed. And that's what we have. We have a democratic republic. It embodies and combines features of both. And that arguably has made all the difference. And it's under attack. Our future elections are under attack. Our sacred franchise is under attack. I mean, look at Texas. And let me say this. Trump is afraid. All that stuff about how I can do anything I want, that's like him whistling in the graveyard at midnight. Otherwise, why would he say things like Texas should have 5 more representatives? It's because things are not going well. The strong civil society that we have is responding, and he and his cabal see this. They see it. And they're afraid that the Democrats are going to take the House. Arguably, this would even be traditional. On off years, the opposing party usually gets great gains in the House. And they're afraid because they know what they're doing, and they know that there's a huge opposition to what they're doing. And they're afraid the Democrats are going to take back the House and impeach him again, like they did in 2018 and 2019, and with good cause. Democratic representatives, weeks ago now, they took the extraordinary step of blocking a gerrymander in the Texas legislature by walking out, so that the intention of these crooked, corrupt, pandering state politicians could not be brought to pass in order to gain 5 more representatives to the House of Representatives. And in order to do it, they literally had to flee the state. Boy, what a commentary that is, huh? And they were right to do it. It was an essential step, but it wasn't enough. The Texas legislature went ahead and violated the semi-sacred, largely unwritten, unspoken rules of custom, precedent, what the ancient Romans would have called the mos maiorum, and went ahead and did it anyway. And also because the calendar is not on their side. Trump and his cabal, to which they scrapingly bow and are subservient to, are not, as I said, doing well, and it's going to get worse. And this isn't just Texas. Once the tactic succeeds in one red state, it will spread like fire if Republicans manage to wipe out Democratic representatives in red states. We're not talking about losing 5 seats. We're talking 10. We're talking 20. Maybe more. Maybe enough to predetermine the 2026 midterms before a single vote is cast. So here's the truth. If that happens, the 2026 elections cannot be democratic. It will have been mortgaged. It will have been foreclosed upon. It will have been signed away to the MAGA fanatics before anyone steps into a polling place. That is why waiting is death. You can't just sit there. The labor movement must act. The people must act. Nationwide, peaceful, nonviolent mass action. No King's Day was great, millions in the streets, not because there was any real king, but because the symbol mattered. And today the threat is not symbolic, it's real. A would-be dictator and his clique are openly stacking the deck. And I want you to understand what's at stake here. Once an authoritarian government decides it can rig Congress, particularly the House, the chamber closest to the people, the Republic is in mortal danger. The Senate may be harder to tilt, but the House, that's the soft underbelly. Control it, and you control the machinery of the government, including appropriation bills. All appropriation bills must come out of the House. And this goes unstopped. If this goes unstopped until late 2026, what comes next is martial law in everything but name. Look, troops are already in D.C. I mean, there's a trumped up, you'll pardon the expression, there's a trumped up propaganda justification for it. The D.C. is out of control. This will be what Trump and the fascist cabal use at every turn. A state of emergency. State, county, municipality, whatever, has lost control of the situation. Federal intervention needed. Trump to the rescue. I mean, could anything be thinner? Could anything be more transparent? And as an adjunct, an instrumentality to their plans, Trump and his cabal have every intention of tearing the Posse Comitatus Act to shreds. They're working on it now. They're trying, they're gaming it. Every constitutional safeguard there is, including Posse Comitatus. Posse Comitatus, basically no federal troops can be used on American citizenry. And California was the first. Some jumped up, half-terrified judge, many of them are terrified now. I don't judge, I merely observe, said, well, Trump could do it in Los Angeles, but he better not do it again. Security forces deployed in the name of order, while elections are quietly suffocated. And this was Judge Breyer, by the way, of the Northern District of California, and he said he found that Trump's June deployment of roughly 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines to Los Angeles likely violated Posse Comitatus. That's the 1878 law that prohibits military involvement in domestic law enforcement. However, the court allowed the federal deployment, as I said, to continue temporarily under the premise of protecting federal property, which is legitimate enough, but for no other reason. So all they can do is protect federal property, but only until September 12th. After that, troops must not perform roles reserved for civilian authorities, like crowd control, arrests, traffic management, perimeter enforcement. Judge Breyer strongly condemned the idea of Trump using the military as a national police force, noting, President Trump is not king, and the power of the executive is not bounding. So, in effect, the ruling says using troops might be tolerated for limited specific purposes like guarding federal buildings, but deploying them for broader civilian law enforcement, that's a hard legal boundary, and that must not be crossed again. So above Judge Breyer is the Ninth Circuit, and this is actually being appealed to. And they've said that statutory, in this case, authority, not constitutional authority, is the key, and that the decision centers on interpreting 10 U.S.C. Section 12406, which is a statute that grants the president the power to federalize the National Guard under specific conditions like rebellion, invasion, or inability to execute the laws. Both the District Court and Ninth Circuit acknowledge this grants statutory but not unlimited discretion. So that's the likely hook, guys and gals. State authorities are incompetent, they're overwhelmed. Now, you're hearing this in D.C. This is the story that they're using in D.C. to justify what they're doing. They've lost the ability to execute the laws. Trump's fascist cabal has already taken over D.C. They crow about it. And this is a different situation, but he's got his eye on other states as well. He's got his eye on Illinois. Just to go over this a little bit, there are two different sets of rules in play. D.C., Washington, D.C., it's not a state. D.C. means District of Columbia. It doesn't have the same sovereignty as the state. And the president has direct authority over the D.C. National Guard, unlike state guards, which are under governors unless federalized. Federal law gives the president broad discretion to deploy federal police and even military forces in D.C. without needing local approval because Congress holds constitutional authority over the district. Now, states? Well, states are foreign sovereign units. States are sovereign units under the Constitution. Their governors control their own national guards on a day-to-day basis. For the president to send in troops or federalize a state's guard, he generally has to rely on statutes like the Insurrection Act, and that requires that either a state request, and that's rare, that a state would request that, or there's a claim that federal law cannot be enforced, or that civil rights are being denied, and the state is unwilling or unable to fix it. And using the Insurrection Act is politically explosive because it overrides state control and blurs the line between military and civilian authority. Courts tend to give presidents leeway, but the optics and the constitutional stakes, they're far higher in D.C., far higher. So again, the difference is this. In D.C., it's essentially home turf. Trump doesn't have to fight state sovereignty. In a state, he has to justify intervention under federal law against a backdrop of federalism and the 10th Amendment. That makes it both riskier legally and more provocative politically. But the point is, this is not a distant nightmare. Instead, we have to assume that this is the plan for 2026. That's the hypothesis I think we must work with. Foreclose democracy in 2026, smother 2028 before it even begins, block the door behind them. So the choice is stark. Act now before the maps are drawn, before the elections are hollowed out, or watch democracy vanish in real time, because once the fascists seize Congress, the game is over. And getting it back, that's going to take more than an election. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll be right back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And just to finish up what I was talking about before we go on to other things, got a little time left in the show. You have to ask yourself as you see these things that I've talked about, what if we get towards 2026 and it becomes obvious where all this is pointing, where it's all going? And it seems to be going towards, you're getting close. Not quite at martial law, but you're getting close to violating Posse Comitatus Act, places like Washington. What if these tendencies remain unstopped? What if it just goes on? What are you going to do? Now, what if we get towards 2026 and it becomes obvious where all this is pointing? The hypothesis must be, it cannot but be, that what is planned here is some kind of martial law around the time of the 2026 elections. Or if the election's allowed, for there to be a chilling effect upon the electorate so that those who would come out don't come out because they are made afraid. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. If you think owning things in your own name keeps you in control, think again. In today's world, lawsuits, taxes, and predators are everywhere. That's why the smart money hides in plain sight. We help you to build legal firewalls, LLCs, land trusts, private contracts that protect your assets while keeping you invisible. Call Twain Consulting today at 310-997-2204. Find us on Facebook at Twain Consulting. That's facebook.com/Twain Consulting. Protect what you've built before someone else takes it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. This is Jake, here to tell you the world is on fire, only you're not being told who actually lit the match. Politics by Jake, Mondays and Fridays at 7 a.m. on KCAA. Well, all right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And, as I was thinking about what to close the show with, and things to me that I think are fun to talk about may not be things that are fun for you to talk about, but I try to come up with stuff that's germane. But and I say this during the show all the time, frequently at the beginning of it, there's so much going on. The Trump and fascist cabal agenda is proceeding apace, and the reason why, as I have articulated before, is they really don't have 3.5 years. They have like 1.5 years. And that is why I have conjectured in the show, as you heard in an earlier segment, that they're trying to shut down or compromise or chill voter turnout in elections, or just completely shut down the elections based on the concept of there being some state of emergency somewhere. They're trying to do that for 2026. I warned about this before. I'm warning about it now. Unfortunately, some of my colleagues are picking up on it. But that's what's basically going on. So, all right. And the idea is that there's so much going on that I can't cover it all. I know other people are covering it, and I kind of have to be fine with that. Occasionally, I will find something that, I want to talk about this and bring this to Politics by Jake listeners. But there's so much going on. I encourage you to listen to some of the other people like me in the alternative media who are sounding the cry and who feel to sound the cry in a certain area, because there are various areas where this is going on and it overlaps. Okay, so last segment, and I guess if I had to give this a name for this segment, I would entitle this, "The Federal Reserve is Not Doing What It's Supposed to Do." And the subtitle would be, "It is Failing in Its Role." And So this is one of the things that oligarchs do. Oligarchs don't like each other. They fight with each other. You're seeing it now. So Trump, and they try to horn in on others' oligarchical interests. And now Trump is attempting to become the dictator of the Federal Reserve System. And this is really no kidding. This is an example of two entities or personages. Of course, the Federal Reserve System is, you'll excuse the expression, a system, and Trump is Trump, and the fascist cabal is the fascist cabal. So, but it's like two things, people that deserve each other. And I've heard people talk about some pretty amazing stuff about the Federal Reserve, like, how great it is. And at Politics by Jake, we don't hold any brief for the Federal Reserve, not at all. Look, it's not that great. In fact, we have to distinguish, and you do, between a greater evil, which is MAGA and Trump, and a lesser evil, and the lesser evil would be the Federal Reserve System. In other words, you've got one war at a time, as Lincoln told Seward in 1861. The Federal Reserve has never been independent. And that's the essence of the current fight, is that the Federal Reserve is run by bankers. And this is an extremely concerning thing, but people just wink at it because the Federal Reserve has been around for over 100 years. 1913 was the institution of the Federal Reserve. It's been around for over 100 years. It's been around for, what would it be? Around 112, 113 years, something like that. And it's owned by private interests. It's owned by bankers. The Bank of England, just to give you an example, is privately owned. The Bank of France is privately owned. And the Federal Reserve is privately owned. It's run by bankers. Look, where do these guys come from? Where does this guy, the current guy, Powell, where does he come from? He's some kind of private equity guy, what we would call on this program a hedge fund hyena. But compared to Trump, it all looks different. And you've got to have the maturity and the realism, and you really do, and the practical political sense to realize this and understand this, that the United States Treasury is in the grip of a private organization that's run by bankers, and that its president sits as a cabinet officer in the administration. And it's been this way. It's nothing new. It's not like, oh my God, Jake, you mean to tell me this just happened? No, it didn't just happen. It's been happening for over 100 years. So that people don't even think about anything about. They just don't think about it. But it's you have to have the maturity and the realism and the practical political sense to realize these things. It's not independent. What it is now, and I think this can be useful. The bankers say, and this is so typical. I mean, this is, like I said, this is two people who deserve each other, or two kinds of personages or institutions that deserve each other. And Trump, you're stealing our Federal Reserve. And he says, yeah, what if I am? And, Trump had been a beneficiary of the New York Fed in his brushes with bankruptcy in the 1990s, but now he wants to take over the whole thing. So one of the things I would say, this is really important, stop idealizing the Fed like it's some great thing. Now, I will say it's a hill that you don't want Trump to take, but it has no particular, that's enough right in the current framework. Remember, like I said, it came around about 1913, 1914, and it was the idea was there weren't supposed to be any more crashes, any more stock market crashes. And personally, I am of the opinion, although I don't have the time to go into it on this particular show, that these crashes were engineered and that they did not come about by happenstance, but that they came about by purpose. But the idea of the Fed, and the last one you had was the Panic of 1907, and that was, pretty bad. And the whole idea of the Federal Reserve was that you would stop these. You wouldn't have these anymore. So, okay, So the Federal Reserve. And so in 1929, there had been the Wall Street stock panic and the beginning of the Great Depression. And this is a complicated story. I've talked about it over the months on this show, but that's your trigger for the Great Depression. In 1937, there was something else that you could call a retrograde motion, and this was actually the capital strike with the oligarchs. The industrial banking oligarchs decided they hated Roosevelt so much, and they did. They wanted to kill him, and they tried to kill him, and make no bones about it. At a time when Hitler was emerging in Europe, they were going to sabotage the economy. And, it probably didn't hurt that it tied Roosevelt at a time when Hitler was emerging in Europe. So this was the New Deal recession, okay? Now follow me on this, because this is important. The Fed's supposed to make it so these things don't happen, okay? So we've talked about 1929, and we could talk about 1931 too, because that's when, in 1929, really what you had was a severe recession. In 1931, when England went off the gold standard, that's when it became a worldwide depression. And that all had to do with trade and how trade was conducted in those days. And people were saying it was the end of the world, and actually it was. In a very certain sort of way, from a certain way of looking at it, it was the end of the world. So then in 1937, you have the New Deal recession. After the war, in 1948, about 47 or 48, there was a brief, but it was a rather severe post-war recession. And then in 1957, there was a recession, the Eisenhower recession. Eisenhower, of course, was the Republican president at that time. And then and follow me on this, because you see, the Fed is not stopping these things. In the 1970s, it was mainly a matter of inflation then, as a result of the fake Arab oil boycott, which was arranged partly with the help of the State Department. CIA was involved in that, and that's yet another story we won't go into now, but just trust me, I've got the goods on that. I can explain that to you. So that happened. So in 1987, the biggest single day loss, remember, at least in percentage terms, that could have been prevented by the regulatory function of the Federal Reserve. 1987. Everybody thought that there was going to be a crash. I remember Dan Rather coming on the news, and it was big breaking news, and it didn't happen. By 1999, we had the dot-com bubble bursting. One of the things is the Federal Reserve could never bring itself to stop the creation of asset bubbles, mainly stock bubbles, but also real estate bubbles, and really all other kinds of bubbles. 1999, it was dot-com. These were companies that had no products. It's just like crypto. It's just like derivatives. These companies have no products. They have no pipeline, no profits, but they went into the stratosphere based on what you have heard me call the greater fool theory. And of course, this is what a bubble does. They were going to come right down. In those days, the Fed had something called Regulation Q, which allowed them to essentially dictate upper limits on certain kinds of, demand deposits in commercial banks, and we haven't heard about that one. I don't know if it still exists, but practically speaking, it's been abandoned. And then, of course, the really big one, 2008, with the role of derivatives, like a warning for the future. This is when it happened in 2008. It's like, if you keep doing this, this is going to be the end of you. It's going to be something really bad. And it occurred in 2008 with the role of derivatives, like I say, credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, and so forth. And that leads us, that's the prelude to Trump, right? The September 2008 simultaneous bankruptcy of just about everybody on Wall Street. And then, of course, TARP, this is the acronym, it stands for Troubled Asset Relief Program. But there was no relief program for homeowners who were being foreclosed on. Remember? So in theory, as a result of the Humphrey Hawkins bill law, the Fed has not just one goal, but two. Up to them, the Fed's purpose had been to maintain price stability. That is, if you had money, you didn't want your money devalued. So they had to keep the value of your money, your fortune, stable. But then wait a minute. This is supposed to be a democracy. What about the workers? What about the workers? Well, you've heard me talk about the workers and that they get nothing. You've heard me talk about that. You heard me talk earlier in the show about the Estates General, and that the peasants and the workers were the fourth estate and they got nothing. They didn't get a vote. This is common. This is generational. It's historical through decades and hundreds and even thousands of years. So, all right, what about the workers? The other thing they added under Humphrey Hawkins was that you had to have full employment. And it's a result of Humphrey Hawkins that the Federal Reserve guy, the head of it, Powell, has to come to Congress at that time and testify, which he did not have to do up to that point. So, the idea that the Fed is some kind of halcyon angelic thing, look at these crises that I've just talked to you about. When the Fed came in, the concept is that you do this, you let us do this, there will never be another panic, right? This was, I think, in the wake of, like I said, the panic of 1907. It broke out on Wall Street, and therefore there was a certain receptivity to the idea. The Fed would prevent asset bubbles. It would prevent financial panics and depressions as a result of those things. But by 1929, 1937, 1948, 1957, inflation in the 70s, then 87, and then 99, and 2008, you can look back on it and you can see the Fed doesn't do what it claimed it would do. It's been over 100 years, and it's not doing it. Of course, you might easily say, and I do say, you'll see something even worse under what we seem to be headed towards now, although it's by far not a done deal. Remember, the Fed has a board of governors. These are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. There's also the Federal Reserve districts, and there's about a dozen of them, I guess. And those Federal Reserve districts, they're all privately owned. Like I said, the Bank of England is privately owned. The Bank of France is privately owned. These Federal Reserve districts within the United States, they're privately owned. And as a privately owned entity, they send delegates to the Federal Open Market Committee, which, remember, that's the thing that sets the overnight interest rate, the so-called Fed funds rate, which right now is between 4 and 4.5%, something like that. So the idea that you have a stock market bubble as big as the one that you have now, and it's big, and I've talked about how big it is. I've heard somebody the other day, something I said 335 trillion. I say 667 trillion. I say maybe a value as high as 4 quadrillion. You've got the crypto bubble, and I dare say you have a derivative bubble. And this is coming, and this is what I'll end the show on. This is something that's important for us all to think about, because this is coming. And this is dangerous, and you need to prepare. So that's all for now. Have a good weekend. We will see you on Monday, God willing, or the God's willing. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. This is Jake, here to tell you the world is on fire, only you're not being told who actually lit the match. Politics by Jake, Mondays and Fridays at 7 a.m. on KCAA.